Chapter 13. Karina? It was 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening, and Jessica had told her parents she was going to Leela's. Really, though, she wanted to talk to Karina about what had happened that afternoon. She peered through the window of the old Luna place and tapped on the glass. "Karina?" she called again, a little more loudly this time. There was no answer. "I guess I'll try the door," Jessica muttered, crossing the yard to the doorway she'd gone through yesterday. She reached out her hand and gasped. The wall in front of her was completely solid. "I could have sworn there was a door here," Jessica said to herself. Gently she touched where she was sure the door had been. It felt just the same as every other section of the run-down wall. The paint was peeling, the wood rotted in places. "I guess I was wrong," Jessica said softly, staring up and down the wall to see if there was a door somewhere else. There wasn't. So how was she supposed to get in? How did Karina come in and out? Frowning, Jessica knocked on the wall, right where the door would have been if there had been a door. She waited, but there was still no answer. "Well, if she's not home, then she's not home," Jessica thought at last. She turned and started walking slowly through the tall grass toward the fence. She was about to slip back through the bars when she heard a voice on the sidewalk. "Happy Halloween, everybody!" An egg soared through the air toward the old Luna place. Jessica whirled around in time to see it smash against the crescent window in the attic. Pieces of shell flew everywhere, and the yolk slid stickily down the glass. "Nice shot," somebody else yelled. Jessica froze. Betsy Martin's voice. Jessica crouched down. Betsy came into view, laughing loudly. She held what looked like a can of shaving cream. Behind her came 3 of her friends and Elizabeth. Jessica's heart sank as Elizabeth let fly with an egg of her own. It crashed into the windshield of a pickup truck parked on the street. "Bullseye!" Betsy shouted raucously. The others laughed. "Hey, let's knock this over," Elizabeth suggested, her eye falling on Karina's rickety fence. "The witch's fence? All right." Betsy shook the rusty old fence, and Elizabeth and a few of the other kids joined in. "Take that, witch lady," Elizabeth sang out. "Stop, stop," Jessica pleaded, holding her breath. A door slammed across the street. "Beat it, kids." A neighbor had come out onto her front porch. "Go bug somebody else." Elizabeth laughed maniacally. Running into the road, she threw a roll of toilet paper up into the woman's front yard. The roll unwound in the air, draped itself over several branches of a big oak tree, and plonked down on the roof of the woman's car. "Get out of here, you hooligans," the woman shouted. "Takes one to know one," Elizabeth snapped back in the sassiest voice Jessica had ever heard. Jessica couldn't stand it any longer. She squeezed through the fence and started running for home. But as she reached her own front porch, Jessica had to stop running. Her body was racked with sobs. "I always thought Betsy Martin was the meanest person in the world," she thought, crying harder. "But now I have to admit it. Elizabeth's become even meaner than she is." "Mrs. Irene Nicholas," said the sign on the door in front of Stephen. "Chairperson, Sweet Valley High School Science Department." Stephen read the sign again. "I hope she won't think that this is just a stupid question," he said to himself. With teachers, you never could tell. He took a deep breath and knocked. A large woman with glasses opened the door. "Oh, hello, Stephen," she said warmly. "My prize astronomy pupil. Come in, have a seat, if you can find one." "Your prize astronomy pupil?" Stephen thought, flabbergasted. He looked around Mrs. Nicholas's office and was even more flabbergasted than before. The floor was knee-deep in scientific equipment. Microscopes and test tube racks hung off the shelves. Science textbooks filled every inch of Mrs. Nicholas's desk. Astronomy posters were tacked all over the walls. It's a federal disaster area, Stephen thought, wrinkling up his nose. It's even worse than Jessica's room. Stephen decided to remain standing. I just had a question, Mrs. Nicholas, he said shyly. A question? Mrs. Nicholas perched on top of a pile of science magazines. Sure, shoot. Stephen cleared his throat. Well, it might be kind of a stupid question. Mrs. Nicholas made a harumphing sound. The only stupid question, Stephen, is the one you don't ask, Stephen finished. I know. He'd heard that line often enough. Did teachers really believe it, or was that just something they liked to say? Anyway, what I want to know is it possible for the moon to be bright red when it rises? Mrs. Nicholas took off her glasses and wiped them on her sleeve. Bright red? The moon is always a little reddish, more like an orange color, when it first rises, because we're looking at it through more atmosphere than when it's higher in the sky. But bright red sounds unlikely. Why? Because I've seen it 2 days in a row now, Stephen thought, but he decided to hold off on mentioning that for now. Just curious. Mrs. Nicholas put her glasses back on. A very big forest fire could put enough red light in the sky to make the moon seem a little red itself, she told Stephen. I suppose that if the sun's rays were to bend in an unexpected way, that could create a bit of redness too. A bit of redness? Stephen repeated. How about a real fiery red? He hesitated. A blood red? Mrs. Nicholas laughed. No, definitely not. Stephen leaned forward. What if someone told you they'd seen the moon rise all blood red? Then I'd say they were seeing things, Mrs. Nicholas replied. Trust me, it can't happen. Stephen bit his lip. Okay, thanks. He darted out of his teacher's office. But I know I really saw it, he told himself. And it wasn't just me either. Jessica saw it too. Didn't she? Stephen rubbed his eyes. Maybe he'd been peering through that little telescope too much. He made a mental note to ask Jessica a question or two when he got home from school. Jessica walked home from school Wednesday afternoon, keeping an eye out for Elizabeth. Moonrise isn't till almost 5, so I still have time to look for her. She knew that the mask had already begun to take over, but she pushed the thought out of her mind. There's still time, she chanted silently. Jessica walked on, lost in thought. Soon she reached Karina's fence. Maybe Karina's home now, she said to herself, squeezing through the fence, which felt even looser than usual. Jessica went to the window and stopped short. The door was back. This is totally ridiculous, Jessica muttered. First it's here, then it's gone, now it's back. Who is Karina anyway? Harry Houdini or somebody? She banged on the door as hard as she could, half afraid that it would disappear again before Karina could hear her. Karina, she shouted. Karina, it's me, Jessica. All at once the door stood wide open. I heard you the first time, Karina said, smiling. As she led Jessica to the old sofa in the living room, Jessica rubbed her eyes. It looked as though Karina's crescent moon had winked at her. This is just getting weirder all the time, she thought. I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday, Karina was saying softly. Jessica blinked. How did you know? Tell me, Karina cut in. Has the problem gotten worse? Jessica looked down at the floor. Yes, Karina, she said. It seems like the mask is, like it's starting to take over. I see. Karina sat in silence for a moment. Does your sister have the mask now? Do you know where it is? No, Jessica thought hard. It might be in her room, but I don't know for sure. Karina got up and began to pace around the room. Did she wear it during moonrise yesterday? Jessica shook her head vigorously. No, I made sure. Then she buried her face in her hands. Oh, Karina, isn't there anything we can do? She sobbed. Karina touched Jessica's arm, and Jessica looked up. Let me think, she said. She stared up at the portraits above the mantelpiece. Jessica waited as long as she could stand. Please, Karina, please, she burst out at last. If you can't help me, I don't know what I'm going to do. I really don't. You're the only one who can save Elizabeth. No, Karina set her jaw. There you are wrong. She rushed to the bookshelves and plucked a book from the middle of a pile. I've just gotten an idea, she said, turning the pages quickly. She stopped and held out a warning finger to Jessica. But understand, my dear, Elizabeth is the only one who can save herself. Jessica's face fell. How? Karina brushed a strand of her hair out of her eyes. According to this book, there is one chance for your sister. What's that? Jessica whispered hoarsely. Karina consulted the book. Your sister must destroy the mask during a lunar eclipse, she said. This and only this can destroy the curse. What? Jessica stared at Karina with bewilderment. But that's not possible, she stammered. It is the only way. Karina shut the book, releasing a cloud of dust, and set it back in its place. How can I get Elizabeth to destroy the mask? Jessica asked, her voice rising in pitch. I can't even get her to take it out from under her pillow. And during an eclipse? You might as well tell me she has to throw it up to the moon. She bit her lip to keep from crying. I am sorry. Karina seemed lost in thought again. Once more she stared up at the portraits. Suddenly Jessica had an idea. Of course! I know! She stood up excitedly. I look just like her. I'll find the mask and destroy it myself. Karina shook her head firmly. Jessica seemed to feel a chilly wind blowing directly from the crescent moon. No, Karina said. The one who is cursed must remove the curse herself. That's not fair, Jessica said, folding her arms angrily. Can't you do better than that? There must be something else. There is nothing else. Her voice sounded tired. Jessica realized that Karina's eyes had lost their sparkle. I know how you must feel, Jessica. No, you don't. Jessica was ready to retort, but she stopped herself. What if I can't get Elizabeth to destroy the mask? She asked nervously. Then the curse will continue to grow, Karina replied. Your sister will become more and more evil. How can she be more evil than she already is? Jessica demanded. Karina's voice dropped to a whisper, and wind from the crescent seemed to grow colder than ever. Do not say that, Jessica. There is real danger here. The curse does not stop with foolish Halloween pranks. She paused and stared hard at Jessica. Even you, my dear, even you are not safe. What do you mean? Jessica asked, her voice squeaky in the dim room. She sat back down slowly. Karina sighed and looked above the mantelpiece. The last girl who was cursed by that mask burned down her own house, she said slowly. Jessica gasped. She felt sick to her stomach. Every member of her family perished in that fire, Karina went on, as though talking to herself. All but one. Jessica leaned forward, her fingers digging into her palms. Who? Who was that? As Karina opened her mouth to speak, Jessica saw the blood-red moon rising through the window across the room. Me, Karina said quietly. Chapter 14. What's that you're singing, Dad? Stephen asked after dinner on Wednesday night. He was studying his star charts at the kitchen table while his father wiped the counters. Singing? Mr. Wakefield put down the cloth and stared blankly at his son. Was I singing? Stephen frowned. Uh-huh. Your voice could use some work, he thought, but he was careful not to say it out loud. You were, Dad, Jessica chimed in. Her math book was open in front of her, but she didn't seem to be looking at it. Something about the moon, I think. Oh, that, Mr. Wakefield laughed. It's an old Irish folk song. For the rising of the moon, he warbled. For the rising of the moon. The pipes must play together for the rising of the moon. That one? Yeah, that one, Jessica said, nibbling her fingernails. I don't think I've ever heard you sing it before, Stephen said slowly. The rising of the moon, Stephen thought. feeling a shiver beginning to creep along his back. The rising of the moon? He shut his eyes, and the image of a blood-red moon sprang into his mind. Could you maybe sing something else? Jessica's voice broke the stillness. Stephen's eyes snapped open. He stared at her curiously. She did see it then, he thought. I wasn't just imagining it. Well, sure, I guess so, Mr. Wakefield said uncertainly, picking up the dish rag again. Found a peanut, found a peanut. Tad, Jessica exclaimed. Then she cleared her throat. Have you noticed something odd about Elizabeth lately? Stephen pricked up his ears. Different? Mr. Wakefield frowned. She's been a little irritable, sure. Are you talking about Elizabeth? Mrs. Wakefield asked, coming into the kitchen with a magazine. She's spending an awful lot of time with those new friends of hers, isn't she? Friends? Jessica burst. How could you call those girls friends? If you knew how horrible Elizabeth is when she's with them. Mrs. Wakefield ruffled Jessica's hair. If you knew the number of times Elizabeth has said something like that about you and your friends. But that's me, Jessica protested. Elizabeth is different. She's a nice person, and she's never not been a nice person. Till now. She's just going through a phase, Mr. Wakefield said soothingly. It's nothing to worry about. Stephen winced. He hated that expression. If his parents could be believed, he'd been through more phases than he could count. He couldn't help wondering about Elizabeth. He didn't like to give Jessica credit for anything, but he had to admit she had a point. Elizabeth wasn't acting like herself lately, that was for sure. Jessica looked almost tearful. And that mask. Yeah, it really isn't Elizabeth's kind of thing, Stephen put in. Now, Mr. Wakefield gave the counter a final wipe and pitched the cloth into the sink. 2 points. Elizabeth's just developing different interests, that's all. People do that. Stephen, you do it all the time. I do not. Stephen stared at his father, hands on his hips. Sure you do. What do you want to be when you grow up? Mr. Wakefield challenged him. That's easy, Stephen answered. An astronomer. Exactly, Mr. Wakefield smiled. Last month, if I remember correctly, you were all set to join the Chicago Bulls. Last summer, you were going to study dinosaurs. Then there were the times you wanted to be a marine biologist, an astronaut, a reporter, a fireman. Mr. Wakefield started ticking them off on his fingers. An FBI agent, a filmmaker. Have I forgotten anything? Race car driver, Stephen said automatically. Sure, I've wanted to be a bunch of stuff, but that's different. He waved his hand in the air. See, what I really want to be is an astronomer. All the other things I don't care about all that much. Mr. Wakefield just smiled. It is different, Dad, Jessica said earnestly. Changing his mind is like part of Stephen's personality. Elizabeth doesn't ever change. Don't you get it? Right, Stephen agreed. She's out with Betsy Martin, isn't she? I'd say that's a pretty big change for my sister. Betsy Martin is so mean, Jessica said dramatically. Mrs. Wakefield laughed and gave Jessica a hug. You can't expect things to be the same forever, she said. Children develop at different rates, that's all. Next week, she'll probably move on to some other friend. Great, Stephen told himself. Just what we need, a lecture on child psychology. Jessica stood up, clutching her math book. Well, I'm going to go upstairs to study. Her voice sounds higher than usual, Stephen thought, watching her leave the room. Obviously, something was really bugging her. Jessica was sobbing into her pillow a few minutes later when there was a knock at the door. Who is it? She called, hastily drying her eyes. Maybe it's Elizabeth, she told herself, and everything will be all right after all. Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll be lead vocalist on Johnny Buck's next album. It's me, Stephen's voice came through the door. Can I come in for a minute? Stephen? Jessica blew her nose and opened the door a crack. What do you want? She demanded, sounding more cross than she intended. Hey, don't bite my head off, Stephen said, shoving the door the rest of the way open. He came in and perched at the end of Jessica's bed. It's not my fault. No, Jessica agreed. She felt too tired to argue, and anyway, she knew Stephen was right. Listen, Stephen, what do you want? I'm supposed to be studying, and I just wanted to ask you something, Stephen said, interrupting. You told me that you'd seen the moon rise all bloody red, right? Jessica suddenly felt all creepy again. She nodded slowly. Right. Stephen ran his hand through his hair. He took a deep breath. And, well, I was just wondering, did you see it again today? Without warning, a picture leaped into Jessica's mind. The moon rising outside Karina's window. Her skin prickled. Yeah, I did, she said in a half-whisper. Stephen frowned. So did I. It was bloodier than ever today. He shuddered slightly as if remembering what he'd seen. I saw it rising just as Elizabeth came up the stairs this afternoon. Jessica's heart went cold. Elizabeth? Was she wearing that mask? Stephen shook his head. Why do you ask? Jessica hesitated. Stephen, she said, sitting up and narrowing her eyes, you agree with me that Elizabeth's acting weird, right? Stephen folded his arms. Well, I don't know if I'd say weird exactly. I mean, there's weird, and then there's, oh, spare me, Jessica burst out. Just say it. For a moment, Stephen looked stricken. Then he sighed. Oh, okay. She's been acting weird. All right. Jessica came to a decision. I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound completely unbelievable, okay? Stephen raised an eyebrow and nodded. But you have to believe it, Jessica went on, because why? Jessica stared straight at her brother. Because every single word of it is true. So let me get this straight, Stephen said 10 minutes later. The witch who lives at the old Luna place gave you a bottle of something she said was iced tea, and you actually drank it? Jessica sighed impatiently. That's not the point, Stephen, and you know it. The question is, do you believe me or not? Because if you don't, you can get out of my room right this minute. She put on her fiercest look and began to stand up. All right already, I believe, Stephen said quickly. That's better. Jessica flopped back on the bed. She wasn't at all sure that Stephen really did believe her story, but she decided it didn't matter. Even if he thinks it's just a big joke, she thought, maybe he can help me anyway. So when's the next lunar eclipse? She asked. Stephen hooted. Don't you remember? I told you all about it a few days ago. Well, I wasn't listening, Jessica retorted. Give me a break, she felt like saying. Why does he think I should pay attention to everything he says? So just tell me when it is. Day after tomorrow, Stephen said. Halloween night at midnight. Halloween night? Jessica sat straight up. Then we've got our work cut out for us. How's that? Stephen looked puzzled. Elizabeth's got to destroy that mask during a lunar eclipse, Jessica reminded him. Which means that we've got to stick with her on Halloween, somehow, which doesn't give us much time to plan. Her mind raced. Maybe I could ask her to dress up as a two-headed sea monster with me. Jessica got up and began to pace. I told her that was a kind of a stupid idea, but I could say I've changed my mind. Yeah, maybe. Wait a second, Jessica, Stephen broke in. From what you're telling me, it doesn't sound like she'd go for that idea right now. Jessica froze. I guess you're right. She felt as though she'd been riding in a hot air balloon that had just sprung a leak. She could hear Elizabeth's new voice in her mind. You want to do what? Of all the incredibly dumb, idiotic, 3-year-old ideas. She grimaced. It wouldn't work. Let me see, Stephen said thoughtfully. If the eclipse starts at midnight, did the Catwoman down at the Luna place say Elizabeth had to destroy the mask during the eclipse or only during that night? You mean Karina, Jessica thought back. During the eclipse. That makes it tough, Stephen said, scratching his ear. Suddenly his face lit up. I think I have an idea, he told Jessica. What is it? Jessica leaned forward with excitement. Stephen chuckled. Patience, patience, he told her. Didn't you ever hear that curiosity killed the cat? If you don't tell me right this instant, Jessica demanded, curiosity is going to end up killing you. She grabbed his right arm and pinned it behind his back. All right, Stephen said quickly. Here's my plan. As he described it, Jessica listened with growing excitement. It just might work, she realized when he had finished. It just might work. When the final bell rang on Thursday afternoon, Jessica quickly slipped into the girls' room to change her clothes. Instead of books, her backpack was full of the ugliest, most beat-up clothes in her closet. Torn blue jeans, a t-shirt that had never fit, a moth-eaten sweater that hadn't been washed in months. Ugh, gross, Jessica thought, but she put the clothes on anyway. Then she stood back to examine herself in the mirror. Just to be safe, she mussed up her hair a little. The door swung open and Amy came into the bathroom. "Oh, hi, Elizabeth," she said with a gulp, crossing to the sink as far across the room from Jessica as possible. "It's working," Jessica thought excitedly. She put on her best evil Elizabeth face. "Will you just quit following me around?" she snarled. Amy jumped. I'm not," she stammered. Jessica groaned inwardly. Even though she knew it was all in a good cause, Jessica felt a surge of sympathy for Amy. It must be awful to have your best friend turn on you without your knowing why. Afraid to say anything else, Jessica headed into the hall, banging the door behind her. "Now to find Betsy," she muttered, striding quickly through the halls. Usually it's really easy to pretend to be Elizabeth. All you have to do is act super nice. But today was a different story. Betsy was standing on the front steps of the school. "Hey, Elizabeth." Her eyes traveled up and down Jessica's outfit. "Real cool, kid. Way, way cool." "Thanks." Jessica made her voice sound as tough as possible. "So there's a party on Courage Mountain tomorrow at midnight." She winked at Betsy, her heart beating furiously. "Let's crash it." "You kidding or what?" Betsy looked at Jessica's face. Jessica burst out. "Cross my heart and hope to. No way," she added, waving the idea away with her hand. Betsy rolled her eyes. "Sometimes you're still such a dweeb." Then her eyes glinted. "So what party?" "High school party," Jessica said, thrusting her chin forward the way she had seen a tough teenager do in a movie once. "You game, or what?" "Who told you?" Betsy sounded suspicious. "My brother," which is the truth, Jessica reminded herself, for a change. She moved closer to Betsy and winked. "So are you coming, or are you chicken?" "Ha!" Betsy made an ugly noise back in her throat. "Don't call me scared, sister. I'll be there, if it isn't past your bedtime." All right, Jessica thought. Stage 1 complete. She felt like dancing. "Gotta go," she said, flashing Betsy a grin out of the corner of her mouth. "Catch you later." "Yeah, later," Betsy began. "And hey," but Jessica was gone. One more errand, Jessica thought. She darted back inside the school building and into the library. She dropped her backpack on one of the tables. "Be at the party," she wrote in cursive on a sheet of notebook paper. Then she hesitated. "No good. Elizabeth will recognize my writing." Tearing off a new sheet of paper, Jessica began again. In plain block capitals, she wrote, "Be at the party or die." That looks better. Jessica held it in front of her and stared at it. Just to be on the safe side, she added the word fool. "Be at the party or die, fool," she read quietly. Sounds like Betsy, all right. Jessica sighed. Now, how would Elizabeth know which party the note was talking about? She drummed her fingers on the table and thought. Aha! She added another line. "The Courage Mountain Party Halloween night, duh." Better. Next to that, she wrote the words, "high school," and underlined them 3 times. Jessica checked her work again and nodded. One more line. "P.S.," she read as she formed the letters. "Make sure you bring that awesomely revolting mask." No, wait a minute. Betsy's not a good speller, is she? Jessica carefully erased the O in awesomely and turned it into a U. Awesomely, that should do it. Jessica signed the note, Betsy M., slid out of her seat, and headed for her sister's locker. Crossing her fingers, she dropped the note inside. Chapter 15. "What wonderful costumes, girls," Mandy's mother said, filling Halloween bags with candy. It was Halloween night, and Jessica was out trick-or-treating with her unicorn friends. "Mine is a real figure skating costume from the Olympics," Leela bragged, strutting a little. "Isn't it awesome?" "It's beautiful," Mrs. Miller replied. "And Mary, I can't imagine how many hours you must have worked to put your outfit together." "Thanks, Mrs. Miller," Mary said, touching her gypsy skirt and veil with pride. Janet stepped forward. "What do you think, Mrs. Miller?" she asked, spinning around to show off her ball gown. "My mother knows the designer who makes all the clothes for the Queen of England. Well, not the Queen exactly, but one of her very best friends. Do you like it?" "It's lovely," Mrs. Miller said appreciatively. Jessica sighed impatiently. Watching her friends show off their Halloween costumes was about the last thing she wanted to do just then. Her own costume wasn't exactly anything to brag about. She'd been so worried about Elizabeth that she hadn't given her costume another thought till about 5 o'clock that day. At that point, all she could find was an old sheet. Mrs. Miller peered off into the darkness. "Who's that down there at the bottom of the steps?" "It's Jessica," Leela said immediately, rolling her eyes. "Some great costumes she's got," she said. "Totally original," Janet added dryly, "and I just bet it took loads and loads of time and money to put together." "Why, I think it looks very nice," Mrs. Miller said, frowning at Janet. "Tell me, dear, what are you supposed to be?" she asked Jessica. "With an old white sheet draped over her body?" Ellen sneered. "Can't you tell, Mrs. Miller? I thought it was obvious. She's a ghost, of course." "Actually, I thought she was a peeled potato at first," Janet muttered to Leela in a voice loud enough for Jessica to hear. Jessica turned red. "It's a good thing the sheet covers my face," she thought. "Don't be silly," Leela said, reaching for the tag on Jessica's sheet. "See, it says machine wash warm. You wouldn't wash a potato in a washing machine now, would you?" She giggled hysterically. Mrs. Miller sighed. "Have a good time trick-or-treating, girls," she said, closing the door gently but firmly. "Whatever gave you the idea for such a stupid costume anyway?" Leela demanded as the group headed for the next house. Jessica shrugged. She really didn't have the energy to get mad at Leela. "I thought it would be fun," she said simply. "Fun?" Leela repeated incredulously. "What's fun about an old sheet?" "You certainly aren't helping to let everybody know what good dressers the unicorns are," Janet agreed, staring hard at Jessica. "Really, Jessica," Tamara said, "have you thought at all about the unicorn image?" But Jessica didn't say anything. She plodded on to the next house, checking her watch. Only 8 o'clock, another 4 hours before it was time to save Elizabeth. Maria shook her head and sighed. "Doing a bicycle is fun, but I wish Elizabeth were here." "I know what you mean," Amy told her. The two girls were skating along in precise rhythm, connected by a cardboard frame. Each girl held a metal wheel in her hand. "It doesn't feel right, somehow." Maria slowed down her strides. "There she is now." "Where?" Amy peered off into the darkness. "With Betsy Martin and her gang," Maria said sadly, hating the whole idea. As she watched, Elizabeth opened up a mailbox and shoved something inside. "What do you bet that's a rotten apple?" she asked, as Elizabeth ran off in a fit of giggles. "Or worse," Amy shuddered. "Let's find out." Together they skated to the mailbox. Maria opened it gingerly and looked inside. "Ugh, how can Elizabeth do this?" she wondered. She pulled out the insides of a pumpkin. "Some great joke," she said bitterly. "Hey, what's that?" Amy asked suddenly. 2 little girls were coming toward them. One was dressed as a ballerina, the other as a princess. The princess was in tears. "What's the matter, honey?" Maria called to her. The girl only cried harder, but her friend spoke up. "A couple of big kids grabbed our candy bags." She looked as if she was about to cry herself. Maria's heart sank. Were they girls or boys? She asked gently. Girls, the ballerina sniffed. They just came running down the sidewalk and we couldn't stop them, she explained. They yelled, "Give us your candy," and then they were gone before we could say anything. I'm so sorry, Maria said, giving the girls a hug. Did one of them have long blonde hair? She asked, suspecting she already knew the answer. Uh-huh, the princess wailed, and she had on an awful mask. Do you know her? The ballerina asked curiously. Is she like one of your friends or something? She used to be, Maria said sadly, catching Amy's eye, but it seems like we don't really know her anymore. Hey, Jess. Normally Jessica's heart leaped when she saw Aaron Dallas, but not tonight. He was standing on the other side of the street, dressed in a basketball jersey and waving frantically to her. Oh, hi, Aaron, she called back without enthusiasm. Happy Halloween, Aaron called, starting across the road. I've been looking all over for you. You have? Letting the other unicorns walk on, Jessica hung back to wait for Aaron. How could you tell it was me? She asked curiously. Oh, I'd know you anywhere, Aaron explained. Jessica wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, so she said nothing. What kind of a costume is that, anyway? Aaron asked. You're not a ghost, are you? He looked at her, a frown spreading onto his face. I mean, that would be kind of, well, not very original. Oh, I'm not a ghost, Jessica replied quickly. I'm a mad scientist who's invented a formula that turns people evil. Oh, Aaron seemed doubtful. And you spilled the formula all over yourself? Jessica felt a surge of irritation. No, Aaron, I'm dressed this way to keep the bad guys from finding me. Uh-huh, Aaron scratched his head. Why are the bad guys trying to find you if your formula makes people evil? Jessica sighed. Never mind. Well, it doesn't matter anyway, Aaron decided. Shyly, he reached out a hand and brushed it against her sheet. It's a nice night, he said in a husky voice. Uh-huh. He's trying to hold my hand, Jessica realized. She thought back to just a few days ago when she had been daydreaming about this exact thing happening. Somehow, she felt very differently about it today. With Elizabeth getting more evil all the time, she just didn't have the energy to think about holding hands with Aaron. And we're kind of alone. Aaron fumbled against the side of the sheet, searching for Jessica's hand. Aaron really is pretty cute, Jessica reminded herself. Slowly, she began to snake her own hand out of the sheet to meet his. We could, trick or treat together for a while, Aaron suggested, sounding as though he'd just come up with the idea. That might be nice. Jessica's hand ran into a fold of the sheet. No way out of here. She reached further back and tried again. It really is a nice night. Aaron looked up at the sky. Jessica struggled to find a way to get her arm out, but whichever direction she pushed her hand, it kept getting stuck inside the sheet. She sighed impatiently. Are you all right, Jessica? Aaron stepped closer and put his arm around her shoulders. Look over there behind the buildings. Have you ever seen such a beautiful moon? Moon, Jessica thought. Suddenly she was in a panic. The moon! She didn't dare look at it. In less than 4 hours, she told herself, there is going to be an eclipse. And if I can't find Elizabeth and figure out some way to get Elizabeth to destroy that mask, then... Aaron, how often does a lunar eclipse come around? Jessica demanded suddenly, twisting out of his reach. Aaron looked surprised. Gee, I don't have a clue, Jessica, he answered. He stepped forward again. Why don't we just... But Jessica could listen no more. I'm sorry, Aaron, she told him. A vision of Elizabeth had sprung into her mind. Elizabeth, looking more and more like Karina's sister, a strange fiery glow surrounding her face. I've got to go. She backed away. I'll see you around or something. She shut her eyes. The image vanished. Bye. Hey, wait, Aaron called. But it was too late. Jessica was out of sight. At 11 o'clock, Jessica finished arranging the pillows under the covers on her bed. Stepping back, she examined her work. Not bad, she nodded slowly. If you didn't look too closely, you might actually think a girl was sleeping in that bed. Jessica drew a deep breath. This has to work, she promised herself, wishing she could believe it. It has to. Softly she came downstairs and crouched in the hall outside the living room. Well, I'm heading to that party now, she heard Stephen say. What party? Mrs. Wakefield sounded doubtful. You remember, the party on Courage Mountain, Stephen reminded her. I told you about it last week. Jessica held her breath as she waited for her mother's answer. Well, it is Halloween, Mrs. Wakefield said at last with a yawn. Just don't be too late. By the way, where are the girls? Jessica's asleep in bed, Stephen assured her, and Elizabeth will be home later, I guess. All right, Mrs. Wakefield agreed. Have fun. Stephen came clumping through the kitchen and into the hall. Get going, he hissed at Jessica when he saw her. Quickly, Jessica stood up and followed her brother out to the garage. I hope this works, he muttered to no one in particular, wheeling his bicycle into the driveway. Jessica said nothing. She hopped aboard her own bike and started to pedal furiously toward Courage Mountain. Hey, Stephen snapped from behind her. Wait for me! But Jessica pedaled as fast as ever. Every minute counted. The cool night air seemed alive. Hurry, hurry, it urged her. She had to reach Courage Mountain before it was too late. What if Elizabeth isn't there? She thought fearfully. And then she pushed the idea out of her mind. She'll be there, she'll be there, she'll be there, Jessica chanted silently. Rounding a sharp curve a few blocks from home, Jessica began to pedal up Courage Mountain. The going was harder now. Her breath came in short gasps, but she didn't dare slow her pace. Downshifting, she looked up and saw the outline of an old dead tree, its branches silhouetted eerily against the moon. The full moon, Jessica thought uneasily. She had never seen the moon look so enormous and so red. What a stupid pumpkin, Betsy Martin sang out, staring at the Wakefield's porch rail. Elizabeth laughed. She had been laughing all night, it seemed. She had laughed when Betsy had grabbed extra candy from the little kid who was passing out the treats at one house. She had laughed when the gang had grabbed a fourth grader's hat, filled it with shaving cream, and shoved it back into his head. She had laughed when Betsy had put rotten eggs behind the wheels of a parked car. She had even laughed when Betsy had placed a sign in front of the old Luna place that said, "Just break the windows if I don't hear you ring the bell." It's not trick or treat, she thought gleefully. It's trick or trick, and boy, is it ever fun. Betsy's eyes roved up and down the gang behind her and came to rest on Elizabeth. Smash it, she ordered. Then we'll go crash the party you told us about. I didn't tell you about that party, Elizabeth thought, confused. You were the one who told me. Did you say smash it? She asked, a little uncertainly. What are you, stupid? Some of the other kids laughed. Elizabeth stared at Jessica's pumpkin. The candle flickered in the breeze. She began. Oh, come on, don't be such a baby, Betsy said contemptuously. Something deep inside Elizabeth was trying to send her a message, but Elizabeth did her best to ignore it. Who are you calling a baby? She demanded, marching across the lawn to the porch rail. She stared at Jessica's pumpkin. Then she hesitated. Buck, 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 Betsy taunted her. Elizabeth slowly hefted the jack-o'-lantern in her hands. Just smash it. Betsy's voice grew menacing. Smash it! Go for it, Elizabeth, someone shouted. We'll be late for the party. Elizabeth looked at the windows of the darkened house. They're all asleep in there, she told herself with sudden certainty. They'll never know. Behind her mask, she steeled herself to smash Jessica's pumpkin. Standing back on the sidewalk, she began to lift the jack-o'-lantern over her head. The flame of the candle flickered crazily in the moonlight. Elizabeth lifted it up and up. Above her, she could see the moon floating in the sky. For a moment it looked as though it were on fire as well. Do it, Betsy shouted, taking a step toward Elizabeth, or else. A strange war seemed to be going in within Elizabeth's chest. She shook her head hard and stared at the side of her house. Resolutely, Elizabeth raised the pumpkin above her head and took careful aim. Chapter 16. Jessica rounded a curve at top speed, sticking out a foot to keep herself from falling off the bike. She glanced at her watch. Not much more time now. Please let her be there. Behind her, she could hear Stephen coming closer and closer. "We're about halfway up now, Jess," he wheezed. "Keep going, kid." Jessica stared at the moon, big and round in front of her now. What was that? Lifting one hand from the handlebars, she rubbed her eyes. No, it couldn't be. "Jessica," Stephen barked, "keep your eyes on the road." Had she swerved? Jessica looked down at the pavement, both eyes open now. She gulped. Her front wheel had come dangerously close to the edge of the mountain, and on this stretch of Courage Mountain, there wasn't much earth between the pavement and the cliff that overlooked the valley. Staring back onto the road, Jessica looked up at the moon again. No, I wasn't imagining it, she thought faintly, gripping the handlebars as tightly as she could. The moon was burning. Great tongues of flame burst from somewhere deep inside it and lapped crazily around one another. The surface was completely invisible, hidden beneath the blazing fire. It's like a huge lighted candle spinning in the sky, Jessica thought. She could feel her breath coming in short gasps. "Hurry up," Stephen called. He passed her, standing up on the pedals and pushing hard. "We don't have much time before the eclipse begins." Determined to shake the burning moon out of her mind, Jessica picked up speed. "I'm coming," she cried to her brother. Then, to her shock and dismay, she caught sight of the reflector behind Stephen's seat. It looks just like the moon, she thought, and it's on fire, too. "Stephen!" she cried, but Stephen paid no attention. She closed her eyes for a moment, almost skidding off the road, and realized she could not escape, for the blazing moon was in her mind's eye, too. Jessica dragged her bike to the side of the road. Clamping her eyes shut, she thrust both her arms in front of her face. "I've got to get rid of this picture," she thought, but she couldn't. Even without using her eyes, she could still see the moon burning in the sky, and molten bits of fiery rock beginning to drip down the sides to fall on. To fall on what? Jessica concentrated as hard as she could. The picture in her mind was dim, and yet there was something awfully familiar about it. My house. My house, Jessica told herself again, her heart skipping a beat. The fire from the moon is falling on my house. "Don't stop." It was Stephen's voice. Jessica's eyes snapped open. Stephen was staring back at Jessica, a worried expression etched beneath his bike helmet. "Don't whip out on me now." Jessica took a deep breath and shook her head. The image was gone. "Coming," she called, and jumped back into her bike. But as she rode on, a new image came into her head. Karina's crescent moon. She pictured the moon perfectly, and it seemed more real than anything. More real than Stephen, more real than her bicycle, more real than the road, more real than Courage Mountain itself. And Karina's moon was crying. Crying tears, hot, burning tears that didn't seem to stop coming. And then it wasn't the crescent moon any longer, but the face of Karina herself. It's a message, Jessica realized. The moon and the fire, they're trying to tell me something. They're trying to tell me... Suddenly, Jessica understood what she had to do. "Stephen!" she shouted, braking hard. A shower of gravel sailed up from the road. Stephen stopped, a scowl on his face. "What's up?" he asked. I... Jessica's throat felt dry, but as she paused for breath, Karina's tear-stained face seemed more real than anything on earth. "I don't think they're coming," she blurted out, aware of how lame that must sound. "Not coming?" Stephen stared at her in disgust. "Didn't you talk to Betsy? Didn't you give Elizabeth that note like you said you would?" "Uh-huh." Jessica shivered in the cold darkness. She didn't dare look back up at the moon. "I'm going to head back home." "Why?" Stephen demanded, putting his hands on his hips. "Just because. I can't explain it," Jessica thought. "And you wouldn't understand it even if I could. In her mind, the sobbing Karina was changing into something new, a new face, but one Jessica recognized from Karina's house. Karina's sister, she told herself with a shudder. And the tears are getting hotter and hotter. You go on, Jessica told Stephen hastily. Go, just in case they show up. Stephen scowled. Yeah, okay, he said, shaking his head. He leaped back onto his bike. Wheeling her own bike around sharply, Jessica watched as Stephen disappeared into the night ahead. Clutching Jessica's pumpkin between her hands, Elizabeth threw it with all her might at the wall of the Wakefield house. All right, she could hear Betsy yell from behind her. But Elizabeth scarcely heard. She stared at the pumpkin, which seemed to be flying in slow motion. As she watched, time stopped dead. The pumpkin spun into its side. Elizabeth rubbed her eyes behind her mask. For a moment, the pumpkin had looked exactly like a full moon. I've seen this before, she told herself, straining to think back. But where? Then, suddenly, the pumpkin was a pumpkin again, and time was moving at its usual speed. Elizabeth watched as Jessica's pumpkin hurtled toward the house and smashed firmly against it. The pumpkin broke into a dozen pieces, and the candle, still burning, landed in a pile of dead leaves by the side of the house. Yeah, Betsy shouted. All right, guys, this place is history. Let's crash that party now. Elizabeth stood silently, her gaze fixed on the pile of leaves. Where the candle had fallen, she could see a single leaf burning slowly. A thin wisp of smoke curled up from the pile. Wakefield, Betsy's voice was loud. You coming or are you wimping out on us? Elizabeth could not speak. As she watched, a second leaf caught fire, and another, and another, and another. She moved her lips, but still the words would not come. There was a crackling sound, and 2 tiny sparks of flame shot up from the remains of Jessica's beautiful pumpkin. What's the matter with you? Betsy demanded, coming closer to Elizabeth. Staring at the hungry fire, Elizabeth could only shake her head. As she did so, she felt something she hadn't expected, a single hot tear trickling down her cheek. Jessica pedaled as hard as she could, not even slowing down for the curves. If I fall, then I fall, she told herself numbly. I have to get home. If I could only make it there in time. In time for what? Jessica didn't know. In her mind, Karina's sister's face was now changing too, into Elizabeth's face. And Elizabeth was crying too, sobbing as though her heart would break, crying hotter and hotter tears, so hot that steam was beginning to rise from her cheeks. Shaking away the image, Jessica snapped her head back to look over her shoulder. The moon was beginning to disappear. Just a small section was missing from one side, but it was enough to make Jessica frantic. She choked back a sob. Only a few minutes to go before the world is pitch black. Elizabeth, she thought, her heart pounding with fear. Elizabeth, my only sister, where are you? Fire! Betsy Martin shouted. Run! Elizabeth strained to move, but she couldn't. Her feet seemed fastened to the ground. After a moment, there was nothing but silence from behind her. They've gone and left me all alone, she thought, watching as the flames rose higher. Elizabeth couldn't run away. Her whole body felt heavy. Those are my parents in that house, she thought numbly. My brother. Tears stung her eyes. My sister. Above her, the eclipse had begun. As darkness covered more and more of the moon, Elizabeth felt something collapsing deep inside her heart. The flames grew wilder. Behind her mask, she pictured her family sleeping in their beds, unaware of the fire beginning to grow outside, and her chest began to heave. This is my last chance, she told herself, straining to get her legs to move, but she couldn't move a muscle. In the gathering darkness, Elizabeth began to cry. Jessica looked frantically up into the sky, narrowly missing a station wagon that barreled by her, tires screeching. The moon was more than half gone. Where is she? She wondered desperately. Her chest heaved with the effort of pedaling. She reached up to wipe some moisture from her cheek, and in a flash Jessica realized that the tears she was imagining on Elizabeth's face weren't Elizabeth's at all, but Jessica's own. Chapter 17. Oh no, Jessica thought as she came riding up to the Wakefield house and skidded to a stop. A fire was beginning to rage, and Elizabeth was standing nearby, crying desperately. Without saying a word, Jessica ditched the bike, leaving the wheels spinning crazily. She ran to Elizabeth and gave her sister a quick hug. Then she raced to the back of the house. She grabbed the garden hose. Her fingers felt about 12 sizes too large as she tried to turn on the faucet full blast. The first 2 times she couldn't turn the faucet at all. The third time the water coughed and then began to shoot from the end of the hose. Carrying the hose in front of her, Jessica ran around to the front again and aimed the water onto the fire. I only hope it's not too high already, she told herself grimly. The water sizzled as it fell into the flames. Come on, Jessica urged it silently. Come on! Jessica knew that the last sliver of moon was disappearing. She stole a glance at her sister's face, hidden by the mask. It's time, Lizzie, she pleaded, concentrating on sending a message to her twin. This is it. It's now or... The flames leaped higher, and Jessica realized she wasn't paying enough attention to the fire. Stepping forward, she sprayed the water all over the pile. Dried leaves she saw mixed with what she recognized as the remains of her own pumpkin. The fire sputtered. Jessica stole a look upward. As she watched, the tiniest bit of moon glowed in the sky for the briefest of moments, and then all was dark. She turned to her sister. Elizabeth's body had gone limp. With an effort that seemed to exhaust her completely, Elizabeth reached up and pulled the mask off her face. The remains of the fire lapped at the edge of the lawn. Jessica ached to help her sister, but remembered Karina's words. Elizabeth is the only one who can save herself. She watched as Elizabeth clenched and unclenched her fingers. Then, with an angry, determined motion, Elizabeth wadded up the awful mask and flung it violently into the fire. There was a sizzling sound as the flames licked around the outside of the mask, and then a bursting sound as the inside caught on fire as well, and then the cold, dark air was filled with a terrible smell of burning, and the next thing Jessica knew, her sister had leaped into her arms and was crying hysterically. With one arm, Jessica clutched her twin as hard as she could. With the other, she trained the hose on the fire until the last ember was out, and the first sliver of moon had peeked back into the sky. Jessica braced herself and looked up. It wasn't red this time, and it wasn't on fire. It was the same old, normal moon she'd seen for years before this whole awful business had started. Jessica closed her eyes, gently at first, then more firmly. The only picture she got this time was Karina's crescent moon, grinning as usual, or perhaps a little more than usual. Jessica sighed deeply in the cool night air and turned to her sister. The hair around Elizabeth's face was wet with tears. Oh, Jess, I'm so sorry, she stammered. Shh, Jessica said soothingly, brushing away the hair from her sister's face. Hey, Lizzie, she began gently. Let's be a 2-headed sea monster next Halloween, okay? I don't know how to thank you, Karina, Jessica said with feeling. It was Saturday morning, and she and Elizabeth were sitting on Karina's old couch sipping iced tea. Karina sat in her usual chair, a smile on her face. Actually, I'm the one that should be thanking you, Elizabeth put in, leaning forward. If you hadn't done so much to help Jessica, I'd be, well, I don't know what I'd be, she shuddered. Jessica frowned. Are you positive that the mask won't come back again, she asked uncertainly. I know I saw it burn and everything, and this morning we spread out the ashes and buried them, just to be safe, but Karina shook her head. "We can hope," she said, "but I'm afraid, my dear, that we can never be sure." "I'll never know how you got there when you did," Elizabeth added, reaching for her sister's hand. "Just lucky, I guess." Luck had nothing to do with it, Jessica thought, squeezing Elizabeth's hand back. She winced as she remembered the images that had flashed through her mind that night. The moon a ball of fire, Karina's crescent crying, and then Elizabeth's own face. Luck? Yeah, right. Out of the corner of her eye, Jessica could see Karina wink at her sympathetically. She knows all about it, Jessica told herself with a rueful grin. Somehow she wasn't surprised. Karina stood up and stretched. "I'm going to get some more iced tea," she announced. "Would you girls like some?" "No, thank you," Elizabeth said, as Jessica shook her head. "Very well," Karina told them. "I'll be right back." She vanished into the kitchen. "She's an amazing person," Elizabeth murmured, watching her go. "She sure is," Jessica agreed. "You know, we should really do something to show our appreciation." Elizabeth smiled. "Maybe we could offer to weed our garden," she said eagerly. "I'll see if I can get that old lawnmower working again. And maybe I can clean out all the leaves that are blocking those gutters," Jessica added. "And we can bake her cookies every week," Elizabeth said, jumping in, "and give the house a good coat of paint." "And vacuum once in a while," Jessica interrupted, "and buy her some new lights." Elizabeth giggled. "It's funny to see you getting excited about doing work." Jessica tossed her hair with a grin. "Yeah, well, I can be pretty helpful when I want to." "Believe me, I know," Elizabeth laughed. "But seriously, Jess, we might not manage to get all that work done. Let's just say that we'll visit her as often as we can." Jessica nodded. "Good idea." "Elizabeth's right," she told herself. "We'll do what we can, but visiting's most important of all." She stared up at the portraits above the mantelpiece. "There's only one thing that's still bothering me," she went on. "Who had the mask before?" Elizabeth frowned. "What do you mean?" "There was a fire," Jessica said slowly, "and everyone in Karina's family was killed, except Karina. What I want to know is, did the mask turn Karina's sister evil, or did it turn Karina herself evil?" Elizabeth looked up at the portraits. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "But you know what I think?" "What?" Jessica asked. Elizabeth took a sip of tea. "I think you should let it alone. I think Karina would have told you if she'd wanted you to know." Jessica sighed. Elizabeth was just so thoughtful sometimes. Then again, Jessica wouldn't want her any other way. Karina bustled back into the room and sat down beneath the portraits. "I'm sorry about your Halloween," she said, "but there will be another one next year, won't there?" "It was worth it," Jessica said quickly. "I'd give up 100 Halloweens to get rid of that curse." 100? Elizabeth grinned. "Well, maybe not 100. Thanksgiving's next," Jessica pointed out. "That's kind of fun, too." "Not as good as Halloween, but not bad either," Elizabeth agreed. "Let's see." A mischievous look came into her eye as she stared at Jessica. turkey bells, turkey all the way," she sang out. "Elizabeth!" Jessica cried, rising from her seat. "What, you don't like my singing?" Elizabeth demanded. Jessica sank back down and gave her sister a fierce hug. "I'm so glad you're back," she said.